Russia's President Vladimir Putin has declared a 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine to mark 80 years since Moscow's World War II victory over Nazi Germany. The full halt in fighting is scheduled for May 8th to 10th. The Kremlin says it expects Ukraine to observe the ceasefire, but warned that any violation would prompt a Russian response. Moscow also announced a similar truce during Easter, but that did not hold. Meanwhile, the US says talks on a truce in Ukraine are entering a very critical week. The Secretary of State Marco Rubio said a deal needs to, quote, happen soon, otherwise Washington could walk away from the peace effort. President Donald Trump has alleged that Ukraine's Volodmyr Zelenskyy would now be willing to give up the Crimean peninsula annexed by Russia in order to secure a peace deal. That's something Zelenskyy has repeatedly denied. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first, this report.
As missiles and drone assaults keep battering Ukraine, President Donald Trump has called on Russia to stop its attacks. Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Trump's Vatican meeting came after a frosty February encounter in the White House, where Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance berated the Ukrainian leader and accused him of ingratitude for US aid. Since meeting knee-to-knee in the opulence of St. Peter's Basilica, the US president has adopted a more critical attitude towards Russian President Vladimir Putin and accused him of not wanting to stop the war.
We're going to see what happens. I want to see what happens with respect to Russia, because Russia has been surprised and disappointed, very disappointed that they did the bombing of those places after discussions.
As efforts to find peace appear to approach a crunch moment, the war grinds on. Speaking on NBC News Meet the Press, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the coming week would be decisive.
And we think we brought the sides closer than they've been in a very long time, but we're not there yet, and it needs to start happening. We need to start. I think this is going to be a very critical week. This week is going to be a really important week in which we have to make a determination about whether this is an endeavor that we want to continue to be involved in.
Zelenskyy said Ukrainian troops are continuing to fight in Russia's Kursk region, despite Putin's declaration of victory there. And for the first time, both Russia and North Korea have confirmed that Pyongyang sent troops to Russia to support its war against Ukraine.
Let's get more from Gustav Gressel. He's a military and security expert at the National Defense Academy in Vienna. Welcome to DW. Are we on the verge of the Trump administration abandoning its attempts to end the war in Ukraine?
Well, it looks like it. So Donald Trump has not moved the Russian position for an inch. And as the Russian position hasn't moved, Ukrainians also don't want to give anything for nothing. So the net result is zero. And yeah, the US president is losing patience. Also, he has now the impression that he can't score a easy and quick victory on the diplomatic field there. So abandonment seems to be the call of the day. However, it's still unclear how, when, and under what conditions the US will abandon the show. They still have sanctions against Russia, for example. There is still a question Ukrainians want to buy weapons in the US, whether that will be possible. So let's see.
We heard from the US president that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is prepared to give up Crimea as part of a potential peace deal with Russia. How likely is it? And would Kyiv actually agree to that?
Well, it's quite unlikely. The issue is, what would you get for it? Would Ukraine get NATO membership? That would be something that probably they might consider. But NATO membership is not on the table. Donald Trump has excluded it from negotiations quite early on. The other thing is security guarantees from the West. Also there, the White House has not really answered any of the Ukrainian calls on that. And so it's quite unlikely that Ukrainians will give something away, even if it's just the formal recognition, if they do not get any concession from Moscow or anybody else.
If the US were to pull out as a mediator, how do you see the war ending?
Well, the war will probably drag on. Russia will see how Ukraine will fight without U.S. arms supplies. The current arms supplies the U.S. is providing, they were all agreed by the Biden administration, and there is no new package in Congress, so they will run out roughly by summer, and then the Russians will see how much the Europeans can deliver, how that will affect Ukraine's military situation, and then they will try. And only if they have tried that and have not succeeded in gaining anything, then they will reconsider, and there might be negotiations, but then we'll most likely somewhere in the midst of next year.
What is the situation on the front line as we speak?
Well, the situation on the front line is not unusual. The Russia makes very incremental gains at quite high losses. But one has to say Ukraine is now in a very good position. They got a lot of military supplies from the outgoing Biden administration that they can still work with. Syria has collapsed, and a lot of ammunition for Soviet calibers has found its way to the free market and was bought up by Ukraine, by its supporters through the Czech Ammunition Initiative. So it's now, of course, in a bit of a heyday. We see the critical situation developing with the airstrikes. Ukraine will most likely not receive new Patriot interceptors, and they have to conserve the few interceptors they have, and that allows the Russians to strike with missiles more often, and to get through with missiles more often. And the problem is, of course, will this trend then from summer on also be part of a general military trend, or will this dire supply situation be confined to the issue of missile attacks? That's what we will find out. We'll also find out one way or the other how the Europeans will take it, and whether they are actually able to increase military supplies to Kiev.
All right, that is Gustav Gressel, a military and security expert at the National Defense Academy in Vienna. We appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.